It's great to be here. I have to say, though, last year I had become leader, and this was one of my first events, so it means I've gone a full cycle now, and it's wonderful to be back here with friends. I hope I've improved a bit. It's actually fitting for me that tomorrow I'm doing something that so many of your members across the country are very familiar with. I'm actually flying off to Fort McMurray for work. There's a by-election out there, and one of the things is that I've been engaging with the community and really impressed with how we see in Fort McMurray and in other places how Canadians from all across the country are coming together to work hard to build opportunity and a strong future for us across the country. And it's that pan-Canadian vision that I want to talk about a little bit today. I want to talk about where we're at as a nation and as an economy, about where we're headed, and about where I think there's a need for some course correction. But I'm also mindful of the tremendous amount of expertise that already exists here in this room. You represent the 500,000 Canadians who work in the skilled trades. That's 500,000 of our neighbors and friends who head to work every day and build this country. 500,000 hardworking, well-trained Canadians who, quite frankly, deserve better. These are the moms and dads who, like moms and dads everywhere, struggle to balance work responsibilities with family life. The difference is, sometimes they have to do it from 4 or 5 provinces away. When I talk about Canada's middle class, this is who I'm talking about. People who make daily sacrifices to work hard to make ends meet for themselves and their families, people who depend on their incomes, their paychecks, not their assets, to get by. Si l'on se fie à ce qu'on dit en ce moment du Premier ministre à ce sujet, tout va comme sur des roulettes. Pas plus tard que la semaine dernière à la Chambre des communes, il a rejeté une question que j'avais posée en répétant que la classe moyenne canadienne allait tellement bien. Est-ce que ça semble vrai, d'après vous? En 2014, quel pourcentage de vos membres dirait qu'ils ont pleinement confiance? Ou combien diraient qu'ils sont très optimistes au sujet de leur perspective d'emploi, de leur capacité d'envoyer leurs enfants au collège ou à l'université, ou d'épargner pour leur retraite? If there is no better country in the world to be in the middle class, as the Prime Minister contends, or if middle-class challenges are, quote, a myth, as his jobs minister suggests, then why are so many Canadian families increasingly vulnerable to financial shocks? I think that's a question worth having and a conversation worth engaging in. I'm deeply appreciative of the fact that part of your conference involved meetings with members of Parliament. It's good for us to know about your issues, and it's essential that we get a reality check on how your members are faring in today's economy. For their part, I sincerely hope that the government listened to what you had to say. Their lack of leadership on Bill C-377 probably doesn't give you much hope on that front. Twice, we worked together, Liberals and Canada's building trades unions, to try to defeat this direct attack on labour unions. We proposed an amendment, which the government rejected, and later we worked to get Conservative senators on side. By the time it landed in the Senate, even Conservative senators like Hugh Segal were calling the bill immature, ill-conceived, and small-minded, which it is. In all, 16 Conservative senators voted to gut the bill and send it back to the House. The government, they sent it right back with no changes. Still a masterpiece of anti-worker sentiment. The truth is, the government has a track record of being pretty selective when it comes to listening, and nowhere is that more true than when it comes to the Canadian economy. Ils aiment bien, par exemple, ignorer le fait qu'il existe d'importantes disparités régionales sur le plan de la croissance du revenu. Le prix des produits de base a contribué à stimuler la croissance des revenus de la classe moyenne dans les prairies, mais les revenus ont chuté en Colombie-Britannique et continuent de stagner en Ontario et au Québec. So when the Prime Minister says that there's no better place in the world to be middle class, what he really means is, as long as you're willing to uproot your family and move to Alberta or Saskatchewan. Both great places to live, but they're a long way from Whitney Pier or Windsor. More recently, the Conservatives have been waving around a New York Times story about how Canada's middle class is now better off than the middle class in the US. Again, they're fixated on headlines, not trend lines. The real news story would have been if Canada's middle class wasn't better off, given that the study focused on a decade during which the US was at the epicenter of a major global recession. It just goes to show that this government is willing to embrace optimism whenever it suits their purposes. They want Canadians to believe that things aren't that bad, hoping that saying it could be worse might somehow extinguish the collective sense that things could be better, should be better. Now, I'm not particularly interested in getting into a he said, she said debate about data sets and resulting conclusions. There are many reasons why Canadians feel that politicians aren't always doing a fantastic job at representing their interests, and I suspect that our fondness for citing contradictory statistics might be near the top of that list. Mais je crois tout de même qu'il est important que nous réfléchissions de manière rationnelle à ce que nous entendons réellement sur le terrain. J'ai de la difficulté à croire que les travailleurs canadiens consultent des études longitudinales sur la croissance du revenu publiées dans le New York Times afin d'obtenir l'assurance que notre économie va aussi bien que possible. Non, ils ne le font pas et ils n'ont pas à le faire. Ils utilisent plutôt des normes de comparaison pratiques. Ont-ils les moyens d'envoyer leurs enfants à l'école? Au moment où leurs enfants obtiennent leur diplôme, parviennent-ils à trouver un emploi décent et bien rémunéré? Un salaire qui leur permet de déménager du sous-sol de leurs parents pour de bon? Ont-ils vraiment le moyen de prendre leur retraite? Vraiment les moyens de le faire? Et que se passera-t-il dans toutes les dernières années de leur vie? Auront-ils la capacité de prendre soin d'eux-mêmes? Ou seront-ils aussi à la charge de leurs enfants sur le plan financier? These are the questions that weigh heavily on the minds and in the hearts of Canada's middle class and of all those who work hard to join it. One positive headline, even in a publication as well respected as the New York Times, does not mean that the problem is solved or that it never existed in the first place. In fact, when you take a long view at how middle-class Canadians are faring, the numbers aren't that reassuring. Consider the rewards that the middle class has collected for all their hard work. In the past 30 years, Canada's economy has more than doubled in size, but middle-class family incomes have risen by only about 15%. For Canada's middle class, the only financial measure that has kept pace with GDP growth is household debt. And that's not because we're buying new smartphones every week or going on expensive family vacations every month. Instead, it's the cost of things we need, things like healthy food and school supplies, that has risen dramatically in recent years, way beyond inflation. The same is true for the cost of education and training, something that many Canadians rely on for upward mobility. The net result is that we're now carrying more household debt than families in the United States and in the United Kingdom, and consequently, we're saving much less. It's estimated that the average 35-year-old now puts aside less than half of what their parents did at the same age. That's the economic reality facing Canadians. The government can offer up all the assurances that it is all well, but we know that you can't take a StatsCan report to the grocery store. You can't gas up your truck with a copy of the New York Times. What we need, what we want the middle class to be confident about their economic future, is sustained economic growth. But that confidence is now weakening. Et cette confiance est essentielle, car lorsque les Canadiens sont préoccupés à tenter de joindre les deux bouts à la fin de chaque mois, il devient plus difficile de régler tous les autres problèmes auxquels nous faisons face en tant que nation. And make no mistake, that confidence is essential, because when Canadians are worried about making ends meet, it becomes harder to solve every other problem we face as a nation. We get anxious and suspicious. We point fingers and blame others. From one end of the country to the other, the deeper the anxieties, the deeper the divisions. This has real consequences for all of us. That's because the growth we've seen over the past 3 decades has been the product of a broadly supported political agenda. Things like fiscal discipline, tax competitiveness, openness to trade. The middle class got behind these ideas because they were promised that everyone would share in the prosperity that would follow. Well, the prosperity came, but the sharing didn't. And we now risk losing middle-class support for a growth agenda. And if that happens, we'll all be worse off, and not just in dollar terms. Now, I know that's a pretty bleak picture that I've just painted, but there is good news. In the 1990s, Canadians made some tough economic choices. As a result, our federal government is now in a far better position than it once was. Back then, our national debt represented 70% of GDP. Today, it's less than half that. This is what can happen when economic growth and fiscal responsibility go hand in hand. And this puts us in a unique position. The middle class is tapped out, as are the provinces and territories due to aging populations and rising healthcare costs. But the federal government does have room to invest. And we can invest, first and foremost, in our people. Education is not only a means for us to grow as individuals, it is also a driver of economic success and security right across the country. Your members understand that the best form of job security today are the skills they can take with them to tomorrow's job site. Nous savons que 7 sur 10 des futurs nouveaux emplois au Canada exigeront d'avoir suivi des études postsecondaires. Si nous pouvons relever notre taux de scolarité au niveau postsecondaire pour correspondre à ces exigences, nous disposerons d'une population active, prête à répondre aux futurs besoins du marché de l'emploi canadien. Si les jeunes Canadiens ont accès à des programmes de formation pratiques et abordables, qu'ils soient à la recherche d'un emploi de tuyauteur accrédité ou d'infirmière auxiliaire autorisée, nous n'aurons pas besoin de chercher au-delà de nos frontières pour combler des postes vacants. We also know that post-secondary education, while essential, is expensive. The cost of college and university and training programs are up, while middle-class incomes have stalled. It's time for the government to find new ways to support Canada's learners, including apprentices. In its 2013 budget, the government committed to introducing measures that would support the use of apprentices through federal construction and maintenance contracts, investments in affordable housing, and infrastructure projects receiving federal funding. Good idea, but since then, they've admitted that they have no real plan to accomplish this and no intention to developing one. Backing away from this commitment, while not surprising, is short-sighted and should be reversed. Canadian apprentices need more opportunities to gain more work experience, not more empty promises. Across all industries, more support is needed. Loan payments that are geared to income, personal RESPs to help working Canadians improve their skills, and more effective public-private not-for-profit partnerships are just some of the ideas we've proposed for education. Finally, we need to remember that not every Canadian was born in Canada. Immigration has always played, and always will play, a central role in our economy. We need to find better ways to support new Canadians, many of whom are entrepreneurs and eager to help grow Canada's job market even further. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about what the government needs to do to support our building trades in particular. That includes rethinking its approach to infrastructure spending. Au moment où nos métropoles et nos villes sont privées de capitaux, le gouvernement réduit son programme d'infrastructure de base de près de 90%. M. Harper affirme que plus de financement sera disponible à l'avenir, mais les communautés devront attendre 5 ou 6 ans de plus avant de pouvoir y avoir accès. I know, and you know, that our communities need to repair bridges, upgrade roads, invest in water and transit systems today. These are not challenges that get any easier to solve or any less expensive to fix the longer we wait. Nor should Canadians be denied access to the high-quality, well-paying jobs that infrastructure projects can create. Because, as you all know, the strategic infrastructure Canada needs isn't about general labourers raking gravel. Not that my family's minivan suspension wouldn't mind a few less potholes. It will engage thousands upon thousands of highly skilled, well-trained Canadians supporting their families today while building a country that will meet their families' needs in the future. Pendant que nous sommes dans l'opposition, nous continuerons à nous battre pour que les récentes compressions des dépenses soient renversées. Et aux prochaines élections, nous proposerons à la population canadienne un projet mettant à l'avant-plan de nos préoccupations les infrastructures publiques à long terme. And this is Canada. So we well know that in addition to infrastructure, in the coming years, managing Canada's natural resources will present challenges and opportunities as well. Unlike the current government, we don't see economic growth and environmental stewardship as incompatible. In fact, pretending in the 21st century that we have to choose between one or the other is as harmful as it is wrong. Last October, I surprised a few people by going to Washington, D.C. and telling a room full of Democrats that this Canadian Liberal supports the Keystone XL pipeline. And I do. Having examined the facts and accepting the judgment of the National Energy Board at the time, I believe it is in the national interest. Keystone would create jobs and growth, strengthen our ties with the world's most important market, and generate wealth. Most of all, it's in line with what I believe is a fundamental role of the Government of Canada, to open up markets abroad for Canadian resources and to help create responsible and sustainable ways to get those resources to those markets. But at the same time, I understand our friends to the South's reluctance. A lot of it stems from the fact that Keystone has been treated like a foregone conclusion rather than a complex international project that calls for careful, nuanced negotiation. It doesn't help that the government has stubbornly refused to consider strong environmental policies, including some means of pricing carbon pollution. Last October, I told the Calgary Petroleum Club that if we had a stronger, more credible environmental policies in place, the Americans would have approved Keystone XL a long time ago. And I stand by that statement. But it's also worth noting I waited until I was back home to be critical of the government's approach. Unlike other party leaders, I don't think foreign soil is the place to air domestic grievances. It's increasingly clear to everybody but Mr. Harper and Mr. Mulcair, it seems, that consensus building is the only responsible way to turn resource opportunities into economic realities. We need to draw on our intelligence, on our ability and willingness to solve problems as much as we draw on the resources themselves. Le gouvernement fédéral a également un rôle important à jouer en soutenant les investissements directs étrangers et les échanges commerciaux. Nous avons besoin des investissements et des marchés ouverts à l'étranger pour créer des emplois ici, et nous avons besoin que les importations soient abordables pour offrir des choix abordables aux Canadiens. That's why we chose not to play politics with the recently announced free trade agreement with the Republic of Korea, as well as the agreement in principle with the European Union. We are broadly supportive of those agreements. Finally, we need to take a hard look at what we can do to foster innovation. We've spent billions on research, but lag behind our competitors on productivity. Industry-led initiatives like Canadian Construction Innovations are a good example of what can be accomplished when businesses come together to solve shared problems. The new ideas they generate, the high-paying, skilled jobs that come with them, will be critical to our future growth. Those were 5 broad areas: people, infrastructure, natural resources, trade, and innovation that I think deserve much more attention in the years to come. We've started to build our platform for the election in 2015, and those are some of the core policy areas that will be included. But more than just building a Liberal platform, I think it's time for us to rebuild a sense of hope in this country. If we stay focused on giving every Canadian a real and fair chance at success, and if we work together, business leaders, trade unions, engaged citizens, all levels of government, we can solve every problem that comes our way. I still believe in the Canadian promise that says, with hard work comes opportunity. So I look forward to working with all of you to share that message as we build a better future for all Canadians. Merci beaucoup.